Good morning. I'm going to continue with my series on the 2006 World Championship between Veselin Topalov, the FIDE World Champion, and Vladimir Kramnik, the PCA World Champion. This was the reunification match, which brings us back to having just one and undisputed World Champion. And in the match so far, Kramnik won the first two. Then there was two draws. Then Topalov came with a ridiculous protest about the number of times that Kramnik was using the toilet and the possibility that he was cheating whilst he was using the toilet, and there was some change to the toilet arrangements which Kramnik objected to. He said he wanted to play the game under the conditions that which were first agreed. Excuse me. And then he forfeited the next game, Game 5. He didn't turn up. And Game 8 and Game 9 were won by Kramnik, by Topalov. So even although they've won 2 games each, Topalov leads 3-2 because he got the forfeited game. And this is Game 10. And I don't know if you know, but I'm one of the 4 coaches with Chess Bootcamp. And in my monthly sessions, I've recently finished a series where I've analysed games from the official undisputed world champions. And when I chose a game from Kramnik, this was the game I chose because it's very typical of Kramnik's style. It's very good, and the mental toughness to come back in that situation was fantastic. But of course, it's a delicious irony with how Kramnik has now been in relation to his unfounded allegations of cheating. And yeah, just sad Kramnik. But okay, let's celebrate the good, the fantastic chess that the man was capable of playing. And this is, for me, head and shoulders his best game. Let's have a look. Kramnik has white, Topalov has black. So d4, knight f6. This is the most flexible way to reply to the d4. You can go into Queen's Gambit, you can go into Nimzo Indian, you can go into King's Indian, you can go into Grunfeld. Everything's possible. The pawn comes to c4 and the pawn comes to e6. All these moves are addressed at controlling square d5. The knight comes to f3. This is the so-called anti-Nimzo Indian variation. If the knight comes to c3 to control the d5 square more, the bishop can come out and pin the knight immediately, and then think about taking the knight and working against the doubled pawns. So this move prevents that from happening. So black plays d5, the move he's been working towards, and white turns the situation into a Catalan with the move g3 to play his bishop onto the long diagonal. It gives up this pawn, but it's only temporary. I will always maintain that I don't believe the Queen's Gambit is a real gambit because black can't realistically hold on to the pawn in any good way unless white does things wrong. So he comes out with the bishop and says check, as one does in the so-called Bogo Indian. And the idea behind the Bogo Indian is that if the knight now comes to c3, it is taken and you're acting like you were in a Nimzo Indian. If the knight comes to d2, it's blocking the bishop, and if the bishop comes to d2, well, it's on the wrong square, and it's going to cost black. It's going to cost time and effort for white to get that bishop onto a good square. But he plays the bishop. You got to choose one of them, and the bishop retreats instantly. Job done. Bishop's on the wrong square. Great for me. So the bishop comes to g2 and both sides castle. Pawn comes to c6 to strengthen the centre, a typical Slav type formation. And the bishop comes to f4, a good square. Knight comes to d7, and the queen comes to c2, defending the pawn on c4. So he's no longer having to go to the trouble of winning the pawn back. It's defended immediately. a5 is an attempt to kind of be able to play pawn takes and then pawn to b5. The rook comes to d1 and the knight comes to h5. Kramnik wants to keep his dark squared bishop and also doesn't want the damage to his pawn structure. So he retreats to c1, back where it came from. So we're 11 moves in and none of the queenside pieces apart from the queen are developed. And yeah. Queenside expansion, this makes sense. Takes the pawn in the middle. This is a very energetic way to treat the position. He's got a simple idea, which is to enforce d4. It doesn't give him an extra pawn in the centre, doesn't give him a strong centre, in fact gives him an isolated pawn. But when it comes to an isolated queen's pawn, there are advantages and disadvantages. Usually it will mean quicker development for white. Well, it can't in this case with no queenside pieces developed. But one does get good control over the E and C files, and this is the case here, and usually a freer development for the pieces, but the pawn is weaker in the endgame, so you have to find a way of dealing with that. But the pawn is taken or speed taken, otherwise black ends up with an isolated pawn and probably ends up with a worse bishop than what white has, and you can play a so-called bad bishop strategy. So the queen takes, threatening the rook. The rook comes to b8, so that he's now threatening to play bishop here and attack the queen. Queen comes to e2, so that there's an extra defender for the knight on f3, and so that bishop to b7 isn't a direct threat on the queen. The knight retreats, and as soon as the knight retreats, the bishop comes to f4 again, but no, when the bishop comes to f4, it's an attack on the rook, so he can't just play backwards and forwards. So the rook moves, and the knight comes into d5. The knight comes to c5, again attacking the bishop, but it's taken. This looks like a really anti-positional move. One of the big points about the Catalan and the time that it takes to regain the c pawn is that you get that powerful bishop on the long diagonal, the Catalan bishop. And giving up the Catalan bishop looks like positionally poor idea. But Kramnik has good reasons. He has planned out what he's going to do here. And his plan works really well, actually. Again, it's very energetic play. So the pawn takes, and they both end up with isolated pawns. So the knight comes to c3, threatening the pawn. And yeah. Black would be welcome to come and take this pawn, take this knight, and allow white to repair his pawn structure. So the knight comes to f6. It defends the pawn one more time, two more times. So it's now defended by the queen and the knight, where it was before defended by nothing. So good move. But it loses him a pawn, of course, because he can take this pawn. He couldn't defend both. But black has the bishop pair and some open lines in compensation. And the knight is instantly pinned to the queen. It's defended by the pawn. When you go into such self pins, And when things like this happen, you have to calculate how many pieces can defend the piece which is being attacked, and how many pieces can attack it. Now the rook is attacking, the bishop is attacking, the pawn and the queen are attacking, and the queen can attack. But if the queen goes to b8 to attack, when the knight comes to f6, it's a double c6. It's a double attack on the queen, an attack on the queen with the knight here. Mentally, that can be taken by the rook, but it's also an attack on the queen with the bishop here, and so that kind of temporary business saves white from being overwhelmed. But if black goes about it in a more careful way, rook queen to e8, well, the same applies when he plays rook to d8. It's you expose an attack on the bishop, on the rook with the bishop when you move the knight. So he plays knight to e4. He's now got threats like g5, sorry, squeezing the bishop. So the rook comes to c8, yeah, giving him more support for the c7 square. So they may be able to play knight to c7 if he can move the queen first. Queen comes to e8. Again, another attacker on the knight. So better square to attack the knight from, because you're not exposed to this funny business with knight to c6. But he comes up with a clever defense. So if he takes with the pawn, takes with the rook, then in the end this pawn will be hanging. This bishop will be hanging if the queen comes here. So yeah. So if he takes with the pawn, he can probably take with the rook here, I think, or chase the knight away first. Better still. So the bishop comes to d8 to attack the bishop, attack the rook. It looks like he now has to abandon the knight here, and what's going to happen then? But he has a clever idea. Well, if you take, I take. Whatever you take with, or if you take with a queen, obviously I'm going to take, and if you take with a knight, then the rook, the knight is going to come here, and eventually I will be able to overwhelm this pawn. Is the idea for black. So knight comes to f6. This is pawn comes to f6. Well, apart from the fact Ben Fingal doesn't like it, this is a bad idea. He should be defending his position, not trying to chase away the knight and weakening his position. So knight comes to d7, great. So fork on the rooks and defended by the knight. So, but wait a minute. If he takes the rook, then he takes the rook. And this is what happens. The rook's taken by the knight and the rook's taken by the rook. But then the knight picks up the pawn on d5. This knight now loses a defender. Alright, he might lose a pawn here, but he can't win a pawn by taking with the queen, because the knight is now hanging. So, it's... So the rook comes to d7 to attack the knight. But now the knight comes to c3. He can't take the knight because it loses the queen. And now he's put in place the necessary extra defender for the knight on b5. A great little sequence to not just win a pawn, but get his knight solid on this really fine outpost. But of course, his d pawn is hanging now. So Topalov takes the d pawn, but Kramnik's still a pawn up. He's got 2 on the queen side against 1, and they've both got 3 on the king side. Otherwise, Topalov's got the bishop pair. So now he's threatening 3 times the knight. You can take with the knight, the queen, the rook. So Topalov has to defend with f5. Now the queen comes to c2, keeping an eye on the knight, and also pinning the knight to the queen so that he's now threatening to play pawn to f3, attacking the queen. Rook comes to b4, and instead of playing pawn here, in which case check here might well have been difficult to deal with, he puts his queen in a more central position. Topalov sacrifices the exchange here, or, you know, it's not really a sacrifice. He's going to have to give up something anyway, because the pawn otherwise would come to here when the knight makes it safe to play bishop here to block the check. So he gives up the exchange, probably the best they had. And then knight c7, attacking the queen. Obviously, if the bishop takes, the bishop takes. So, but queen to c4 attacks the knight and the queen. And when the queen gets swapped, the knight doesn't have anywhere to go. But the knight is defended by the bishop, so that is okay. But the queen retreats anyway. Wait a minute. No, can't he just take the bishop? And it's defended by the queen. What is going on here? He does take the bishop, and it is defended by the queen. But Kramnik has the brilliant queen to d7, threatening queen to e8, mate, and double attacking the bishop. So the king makes an escape square, and the queen takes the bishop. He's ready to swap off into the endgame now, because he's got such a good position. He's an exchange up, and pawns are level. 3 against 3 on the king side, 1 against 1 on the queen side. Queen comes to b5, obviously I'd prefer not to swap, but it's enforced with queen to b8 check. Queen's taken, bishop takes. The knight comes to d2, and the knight comes to a1, great, attacking the a pawn. So he makes a break for it with the g pawn. He makes his position more solid, rather than, if he takes the pawn, then knight here check might cause some difficulties for Kramnik. So he just makes things a little bit more solid by giving his king a dark coloured escape square. And the bishop attacks the rook, and the rook attacks the knight. So the knight's the only defender of this pawn, so the bishop has to come to c4, and the bishop comes to c7, attacking the pawn. Pawn comes to g4. Probably isn't much difference in this position, with the bishop forced to defend the knight, splitting the pawns, which usually helps in an endgame, doesn't help very much here. So he plays g4, putting more pawns on white squares where they can easily be defended by the light square bishop and not attacked by the dark square bishop. But now he takes the pawn on a5, and the bishop's ready to come to the ideal square c3, and Kramnik's got a passed pawn on the queen side, and he's still got an exchange up, and there isn't anything to fight for. An absolutely brilliant win by Kramnik. Such a great understanding of position, giving up the Catalan bishop, finding a long, complicated sequence which enforces him having a knight on the b5 outpost, and then forcing off the queens and getting it down to one end game. Absolutely brilliant play by Kramnik. Kramnik at his best. I really, really wish we were in a position to just remember Kramnik for his brilliant chess. I think in 50, 100, 150 years, people will just remember Kramnik for his brilliant chess. Maybe it's not right that his horribleness as a human being will be forgotten, but he isn't the only person in the world who has, at one time or another, the only grandmaster, the only world champion who at one time or another hasn't done horrible things or hasn't been in some ways a horrible person. I think we have to remember that. We have to remember that chess is a sport and an art, and we have to kind of separate that art from the individual at times. And I think you know cancel culture and blaming people for everything possible. We have to kind of forgive and forget and enjoy the chess. Chess is there to be played. It's a game. It's there to be enjoyed. And you know, if uh, if I had said to you at the beginning of this analysis, here's an analysis of a game played in the Catalan, you'd have been, wow, what a fantastically well played game. And it is still a fantastically well played Catalan game, despite the fact that it has been played by someone who has become a horrible individual. I don't think he's always been a horrible individual. I think, excuse me, I think people have said in the past of Kramnik that he was a helpful and kind person to other grandmasters. So yeah, some people have said that he was always a bit arrogant, but you don't become a grandmaster. You certainly don't become world champion without a certain arrogance, without a certain belief that you can do this better than anyone else. Yeah, okay. So then the match is level. It was a 12 game match. This was game 10. The match was level. The next two games were drawn. So the match was drawn. So it went to rapid play tie break. And I'll be looking at tie break games over the next few days. Yeah, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to one of my two channels. Thanks. Bye.